The metallic clang of DeShawn's leg braces echoed against the marble steps of the federal courthouse as he tumbled downward, his small body crashing against the unforgiving stone. The woman, standing above him, her face twisted with righteous fury, watched with satisfaction as the 8-year-old boy struggled to right himself. His metal supports tangled beneath him like broken wings. "That's what happens when kids don't belong somewhere," Karen Whitmore announced to the stunned crowd gathering on the courthouse plaza. Her voice carried across the morning air with the sharp clarity of breaking glass. "Government buildings are for serious people doing serious work, not playgrounds for children who can't even walk properly." DeShawn's dark eyes filled with tears, not from the physical pain radiating through his legs, but from the humiliation of being sprawled on the courthouse steps like discarded trash. His specialized braces, carefully adjusted that morning by his mother's gentle hands, had shifted during the fall, leaving him unable to stand without assistance. The bright yellow backpack he'd been so proud to carry lay split open beside him, crayons and a half-finished drawing of his family scattered across the stone. The morning had begun like any other Tuesday. DeShawn had woken to the smell of his mother's coffee brewing in their modest apartment kitchen, the familiar ritual that marked the start of another day. Judge Michelle Johnson moved through their morning routine with practiced efficiency, her judicial robes hanging crisp and ready on the bedroom door, her briefcase packed with the day's case files. "You ready for Courthouse Adventure Day, baby?" she had asked, kneeling beside DeShawn's bed to help him with his braces. The specialized equipment required careful positioning, each strap and buckle adjusted to provide maximum support for his weakened leg muscles. Cerebral palsy had been his companion since birth, but Michelle had taught him early that his condition was simply another part of who he was, no more defining than the color of his eyes or the sound of his laugh. "Can I draw while you work, Mama?" DeShawn had asked, his face bright with anticipation. School was closed for teacher training, and Michelle couldn't find their usual babysitter on such short notice. Bringing him to the courthouse wasn't ideal, but her chambers had a comfortable couch where he could read or draw quietly while she reviewed motions. "Of course, sweetheart. Just remember our courthouse rules." Quiet voice, walking feet, and always stay close to you. DeShawn had recited dutifully, the words familiar from previous visits. The morning air had been crisp as they made their way up the courthouse steps together, DeShawn's braces clicking rhythmically against the stone. He'd been telling his mother about the picture he planned to draw, a colorful scene of their family at last weekend's park picnic. When the shouting started, "Excuse me, you there?" The voice cut through the morning calm like a siren. Karen Whitmore emerged from behind one of the massive columns flanking the courthouse entrance, her designer handbag clutched against her chest like armor. She was a woman who commanded attention through volume and indignation, her perfectly styled blonde hair and expensive suit serving as props in her perpetual performance of superiority. Michelle paused, her hand instinctively moving to DeShawn's shoulder. "Yes." "This is a federal courthouse, not a daycare center," Karen declared, her voice rising with each word. "Children have no business being in government buildings. They're disruptive, they're loud, and frankly, they're a security risk." The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Michelle felt her jaw tighten. But years of judicial training had taught her to maintain composure, even in the face of unreasonable behavior. "My son will be quietly sitting in my chambers while I work. He won't be disturbing anyone." "Your chambers." Karen's laugh was sharp and bitter. "Listen, lady, I don't know what kind of scam you're running, but you can't just claim to work here and bring your kid along for the ride. This is a place of law and order, not a playground for welfare families." The words hit Michelle like physical blows, each syllable loaded with assumptions about her race, her status, Her right to exist in this space. She felt DeShawn's hand slip into hers, his small fingers seeking comfort as the confrontation escalated around them. "Ma'am, I understand your concerns about courthouse security," Michelle said carefully, her voice steady despite the anger building in her chest. "However, I am Federal Judge Michelle Johnson, and my son is accompanying me to my chambers this morning due to childcare circumstances. We have every right to be here." Karen's eyes narrowed, scanning Michelle's professional attire with obvious skepticism. The black woman standing before her wore a well-tailored navy suit and carried herself with quiet authority. But Karen's worldview couldn't accommodate the possibility that she might actually be telling the truth. "Federal Judge," Karen's voice dripped with mockery. "Please, you probably clean the offices and think that gives you the right to parade around like you own the place. I've been coming to this courthouse for 15 years handling real estate law, and I know every judge in this building. There's no way you're one of them." Michelle felt something cold settle in her stomach. She'd faced prejudice throughout her career, from law school through her confirmation hearings, but rarely had it been so brazenly displayed in front of her child. DeShawn pressed closer to her side, his young mind struggling to understand why this stranger was speaking to his mother with such disrespect. "Mama, why is she being mean?" DeShawn whispered, his voice barely audible. "Sometimes people make assumptions without knowing the facts." "Baby," Michelle replied quietly, her hand protective on his shoulder. "But we're going to go inside now and let security sort this out." They began walking toward the entrance, but Karen wasn't finished. She hurried to block their path, her face flushed with indignation. "Oh no, you don't get to just walk away from me," she snapped. "I'm calling security right now to report this attempted fraud. You can't just claim to be a federal judge and think people will believe you. And bringing a disabled child along to sell your sob story, that's despicable, even for someone like you." The casual cruelty of the words, particularly the dismissive reference to DeShawn's disability, finally cracked Michelle's professional composure. Her voice, when she spoke, carried the full weight of her judicial authority. "I'm going to give you one opportunity to step aside and allow us to enter the building," she said, each word precise and measured. "After that, I'll be filing a complaint about harassment and discrimination on federal property." But Karen had crossed a line from which there was no retreat. Years of entitlement and unchecked privilege had convinced her that volume and persistence could overcome any obstacle. She pulled out her phone, ostensibly to call security. But her real goal was to create a scene that would force Michelle to back down. "Security. Yes, I need you at the front entrance immediately," she said loudly into her phone. "There's a woman here claiming to be a federal judge, and she's brought some kind of disabled kid with her. I think they're trying to gain unauthorized access to the building." Michelle watched in disbelief as the situation spiraled beyond reason. Other courthouse visitors had begun to notice the commotion, phones appearing to record the confrontation. She could feel DeShawn trembling beside her, overwhelmed by the attention and hostility directed at them. "Ma'am, you need to calm down," came a voice from behind them. Officer James Martinez, a courthouse security guard Michelle recognized from her daily routine, approached with his hands visible and his expression carefully neutral. "What seems to be the problem here?" Karen immediately pivoted toward the uniformed officer, her voice taking on a tone of injured authority. "Thank goodness you're here. This woman is trying to enter the courthouse claiming to be a federal judge, and she's brought this disabled child with her as some kind of prop. I've been trying to explain that children don't belong in government buildings, but she won't listen to reason." Officer Martinez glanced at Michelle, recognition dawning in his eyes. He'd seen Judge Johnson enter the building nearly every morning for the past 3 years. sometimes accompanied by the quiet boy with leg braces, who always said good morning politely. "Judge Johnson," he said with a respectful nod. "Good morning. Is there a problem?" The simple acknowledgement hit Karen like a physical blow. The blood drained from her face as the implications of the officer's greeting settled into her consciousness. But instead of backing down, her embarrassment transformed into even more desperate aggression. "That's impossible!" she shrieked, her voice climbing to a pitch that echoed off the courthouse walls. "You're obviously mistaken. Look at her. Look at that child. People like them don't become federal judges." The racist implications of her words hung in the air like toxic fog. Officer Martinez's expression hardened, and several bystanders gasped audibly. In that moment, Karen Whitmore had revealed the true depth of her prejudice for everyone to see and hear. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to lower your voice and step back," Officer Martinez said firmly. "You're creating a disturbance on federal property." But Karen was beyond reason now. Fueled by embarrassment and the desperate need to salvage her position, she pointed an accusatory finger at DeShawn, her face twisted with ugly determination. "And what about that child, even if she is who she claims to be? Children don't belong in courthouses, especially disabled children who require special attention and create distractions. This is supposed to be a place of serious legal work, not a babysitting service." DeShawn shrank against his mother's side, the woman's words cutting deep into his young heart. He'd never been made to feel ashamed of his condition before, never been told he didn't belong somewhere because of his braces. Tears began rolling down his cheeks, not from physical pain, but from the cruelty of being reduced to an object of scorn. Michelle felt her protective instincts surge like a tidal wave. This woman had crossed every line of decency, attacking not just her professional credentials, but her child's right to exist in public spaces. Her voice, when she spoke, carried the cold fury of a mother whose child had been threatened. "You will not speak about my son that way," she said, each word sharp enough to cut glass. "Your behavior is completely inappropriate, and I'm ending this conversation now." She began guiding DeShawn toward the courthouse entrance, Officer Martinez moving to escort them past the increasingly agitated woman. But Karen's desperation had reached a dangerous peak. Seeing her targets escaping, she made a decision that would change everything. "Oh no! You're not getting away with this fraud!" she screamed, lunging forward to physically block their path. "I don't care what lies you've told these people. You're not taking that child into a federal building." What happened next occurred in slow motion, captured by multiple phone cameras and the courthouse's sophisticated security system. Karen grabbed DeShawn's arm, attempting to pull him away from his mother. The boy, already unsteady on his braced legs, lost his balance immediately. "Don't touch my son," Michelle shouted, reaching for DeShawn as he began to fall. But Karen, consumed by her own righteousness, didn't stop. Instead of releasing the child when he stumbled, she gave him a hard shove toward the courthouse steps, apparently believing she could force them to leave through physical intimidation. DeShawn's small body struck the marble steps with a sickening sound that seemed to echo across the entire plaza. His leg braces, designed to support him while walking, became twisted obstacles as he tumbled downward, each impact sending shockwaves through his fragile frame. The crowd that had gathered to witness the argument suddenly fell silent, the weight of what they'd just seen settling over them like a heavy blanket. A woman had just assaulted a disabled child on the steps of a federal courthouse, and it had all been captured on camera. Michelle rushed to her son's side, her judicial composure completely shattered by maternal terror. DeShawn lay crumpled on the stone steps, his braces twisted at unnatural angles, his school clothes torn and dirty from the fall. "Baby, are you hurt? Can you move?" she asked, her hands gentle as she assessed his condition. Years of dealing with DeShawn's medical needs had taught her to check for injuries systematically, but her heart was racing with fear and fury. DeShawn looked up at his mother with eyes full of confusion and pain. "Mama, why did she push me? I wasn't doing anything wrong." The innocence in his question broke Michelle's heart. At 8 years old, DeShawn had been confronted with a level of cruelty he'd never experienced before. Attacked simply for existing in a public space while disabled and black. "You didn't do anything wrong, sweetheart," Michelle said, her voice thick with emotion. "Some people have hate in their hearts, but that's their problem, not yours." Officer Martinez was already on his radio, calling for medical assistance and backup. The situation had escalated far beyond a simple disagreement, crossing into criminal assault on federal property. Karen Whitmore stood frozen on the steps above them, the reality of her actions finally beginning to penetrate her rage-fueled haze. I didn't mean," she began, but her words trailed off as she saw the severity of what she'd done. The disabled child she'd shoved down the steps was struggling to untangle his leg braces. His mother, kneeling beside him, with tears streaming down her face. "Ma'am, you need to remain right where you are," Officer Martinez commanded, his voice carrying the full authority of federal law enforcement. "You're under arrest for assault on a minor on federal property." Other security officers were arriving now, their radios crackling with urgent communications. The courthouse's morning routine had been shattered by an act of violence that would have consequences far beyond what anyone present could imagine. As paramedics arrived to examine DeShawn, Michelle held her son's hand and whispered gentle reassurances. But beneath her maternal concern, a different kind of determination was taking shape. As a federal judge, she understood better than most that actions have consequences. And Karen Whitmore had just committed multiple felonies in front of witnesses and cameras. The paramedics, experienced in handling pediatric cases involving medical equipment, carefully examined DeShawn's braces and checked him for injuries. Miraculously, beyond some bruising and scrapes, he appeared to have avoided serious physical harm. His specialized leg supports had actually protected him somewhat during the fall, absorbing some of the impact. "He's going to be sore for a few days, but nothing appears to be broken," the lead paramedic reported to Michelle. "We'd recommend a follow-up with his regular physician, but he doesn't need emergency transport." Michelle felt a wave of relief wash over her, followed immediately by a surge of protective anger. Her son was physically okay, but the emotional trauma of being attacked by a stranger would take much longer to heal. Karen, now handcuffed and flanked by federal officers, watched the medical examination with growing horror. The reality of having assaulted a disabled child was finally sinking through her wall of entitlement and prejudice. She'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, committed an act that would define the rest of her life. "I want to press charges," Michelle said clearly, her voice carrying across the courthouse plaza. "Full charges for assault on a minor, hate crime enhancement, and any other applicable federal statutes." Officer Martinez nodded grimly. "Yes, ma'am. We have multiple witnesses and security footage of the entire incident. She'll be facing serious federal charges." As Karen was led away in handcuffs, she finally understood the magnitude of her mistake. She'd attacked the child of a federal judge on courthouse property, in front of witnesses and cameras, while making racist statements that would be preserved forever. Her legal career, her reputation, her entire life was about to be destroyed by a few minutes of uncontrolled hatred. But the story was far from over. What Karen didn't know, what none of the witnesses could have imagined, was that Judge Michelle Johnson wasn't just any federal judge. She was one of the most respected jurists in the circuit, known for her brilliant legal mind and her unwavering commitment to justice. She'd spent her career fighting discrimination and protecting the vulnerable. And now, someone had attacked her own child. The courthouse buzzed with activity as news of the incident spread. Other judges, court staff, and attorneys who worked daily with Michelle expressed their shock and support. DeShawn had become something of a courthouse mascot over the years, his polite greetings and quiet presence endearing him to everyone from security guards to senior justices. "Judge Johnson, I'm so sorry this happened," said Chief Judge Robert Harrison, arriving at the scene with obvious concern. "Is DeShawn all right?" "He's physically okay. Thank you," Michelle replied, her son now sitting upright with his braces properly adjusted. But this incident raises serious questions about security and the safety of federal employees and their families. Chief Judge Harrison nodded gravely. "We'll be conducting a full review of courthouse security protocols, and I want you to know that we'll support you completely in pursuing charges against this woman." As the immediate crisis passed, Michelle began thinking like the legal strategist she'd always been. Karen Whitmore had committed her crimes in the worst possible place, against the worst possible targets, under the worst possible circumstances. The woman was about to discover exactly how the federal justice system dealt with hate crimes against children. The investigation that followed was swift and thorough. Security cameras had captured every moment of the confrontation, from Karen's initial aggressive approach to her physical assault on DeShawn. The audio quality was excellent, preserving her racist comments and threats for posterity. Multiple witnesses came forward to provide statements, many of them attorneys and court officers who could speak to Michelle's stellar reputation and DeShawn's gentle character. Karen was charged with assault on a minor, assault on federal property, hate crimes enhancements, and interference with federal judicial operations. The charges carried potential sentences that would effectively end her life as she knew it. Her law practice began hemorrhaging clients as word of her arrest spread, and her professional associations moved quickly to distance themselves from her actions. But the most devastating revelation was yet to come. As federal investigators dug deeper into Karen's background, they discovered a pattern of discriminatory behavior that painted a disturbing picture of systemic bias. Former clients, colleagues, and employees came forward with stories of racist comments, discriminatory practices, and professional misconduct that had been overlooked or covered up for years. The woman who had attacked an 8-year-old boy for being black and disabled in a federal courthouse had been hiding a much darker history of prejudice and abuse. Real estate transactions that had mysteriously fallen through for minority buyers. Legal advice that had seemed designed to disadvantage vulnerable clients. Professional interactions marked by barely concealed hostility toward anyone who didn't fit her narrow worldview. As the federal case against Karen moved forward, Michelle found herself in the unique position of being both victim and judge. She would have to recuse herself from Karen's specific case due to the obvious conflict of interest. But her influence on the federal court system meant that Karen would face the full weight of federal justice administered by Michelle's colleagues and friends. The media attention was intense and largely sympathetic to DeShawn and Michelle. The image of a disabled child being pushed down courthouse steps by a racist attorney became a powerful symbol of the discrimination that still plagued American society. DeShawn, with his quiet dignity and obvious courage, became an inadvertent spokesperson for disabled children everywhere. "I just want kids like me to know they belong everywhere," DeShawn said in a carefully managed interview, his mother's hand supportive on his shoulder. "My braces don't make me different inside. I'm still just a kid who likes to draw and wants to help people like my mama does." The simple wisdom of his words resonated across the country, sparking conversations about accessibility, inclusion, and the casual cruelty that disabled individuals face in daily life. Support poured in from disability rights organizations, civil rights groups, and ordinary citizens who were horrified by what they'd witnessed. Karen's trial became a focal point for discussions about hate crimes, institutional racism, and the abuse of professional privilege. Her defense attorneys, facing overwhelming evidence and public outrage, could only argue for leniency based on her previously clean criminal record. But the federal prosecutors, led by Michelle's colleague, Judge Patricia Williams, were determined to send a clear message about hate crimes against children. The courtroom was packed on the day of Karen's sentencing. DeShawn sat in the front row beside his mother, his leg braces polished and his school uniform pressed crisp. He'd grown during the months since the attack, but his eyes still held shadows of the trauma he'd experienced. Judge Williams, a stern woman known for her fairness and legal acumen, addressed Karen directly before announcing the sentence. "Ms. Whitmore, your actions on the courthouse steps represent more than a momentary lapse in judgment," she said, her voice carrying the weight of federal authority. "You attacked a disabled child because of his race and disability on federal property, while attempting to deny his mother's right to perform her judicial duties. Your behavior was not only criminal, but fundamentally un-American." Karen stood trembling at the defendant's table, her expensive suit unable to mask the hollow look of someone whose life had been completely destroyed by their own choices. The woman who had once commanded rooms through volume and intimidation now appeared small and broken. "The court sentences you to 3 years in federal prison, followed by 2 years of supervised probation." Judge Williams continued, "You are permanently banned from all federal properties, ordered to pay restitution for medical expenses and emotional trauma, and required to complete extensive community service with disability rights organizations upon your release." The sentence sent shockwaves through the legal community, serving as a clear warning that hate crimes against children would be prosecuted to the full extent of federal law. Karen's law license was revoked, her assets were seized to pay restitution, and her name became synonymous with the kind of prejudice that had no place in modern society. For DeShawn and Michelle, the trial's conclusion brought a sense of closure and vindication. Justice had been served, but more importantly, the incident had sparked important conversations about inclusion, accessibility, and the protection of vulnerable individuals. 6 months after Karen's sentencing, the courthouse held a special ceremony recognizing DeShawn's courage and resilience. Chief Judge Harrison presented him with a certificate of recognition, acknowledging his role in bringing important issues to light. "DeShawn Johnson has shown us all what real courage looks like," Chief Judge Harrison said to the assembled crowd of judges, attorneys, and court staff. "He faced hatred with dignity, responded to violence with grace, and turned his trauma into a teaching moment for our entire community." DeShawn, now 9 years old and more confident than ever, accepted the recognition with quiet pride. His drawing skills had improved dramatically during his recovery, and he'd created a beautiful artwork depicting the courthouse as a place where justice protects everyone, regardless of their differences. "I want to be a judge like my mama someday," he said into the microphone, his young voice carrying across a courtroom full of some of the most powerful legal minds in the country. "I want to make sure that kids like me always have someone to protect them." The applause that followed was thunderous and heartfelt. This child, who had been attacked for the crime of existing while disabled and black, had transformed his trauma into a mission of justice and inclusion that would influence his entire generation. Michelle watched her son with pride and amazement. The little boy who had been pushed down courthouse steps by a racist attorney had grown into a powerful advocate for justice and equality. His quiet strength and wisdom had touched the hearts of everyone who heard his story. As the ceremony concluded, and they walked home together. DeShawn's braces clicking rhythmically against the sidewalk. Michelle reflected on the journey they'd traveled together. The attack had been traumatic and terrifying, but it had also revealed the fundamental strength of their community and the power of standing up to hatred. "Mama, do you think that lady learned anything in prison?" DeShawn asked as they paused at a crosswalk. Michelle considered the question carefully. Karen Whitmore had sent several letters of apology during her incarceration, expressing remorse for her actions and claiming to have undergone a transformation in her thinking. Whether that change was genuine or simply expedient remained to be seen. "I hope so, baby," Michelle replied honestly. "Sometimes people have to lose everything before they understand how wrong they've been. Maybe someday she'll be able to use her experience to help other people avoid making the same mistakes." DeShawn nodded thoughtfully, his young mind already grappling with concepts of forgiveness and redemption that many adults struggle to understand. "I hope she gets better," he said simply. Being angry all the time must be really hard. The wisdom in his words took Michelle's breath away. This child, who had every right to harbor resentment and fear, had instead chosen compassion and hope. He understood instinctively that hatred ultimately destroys the person carrying it, and that healing required forgiveness even when justice demanded consequences. As they reached their apartment building, DeShawn paused to help an elderly neighbor carry her groceries, his braces providing steady support as he balanced the bags. The simple act of kindness, performed without thought or expectation of recognition, embodied everything he'd learned about using strength to help others. That evening, as Michelle tucked DeShawn into bed, he showed her his latest drawing. It depicted the courthouse steps where he'd been attacked, but instead of showing the violence and hatred of that terrible morning, his artwork portrayed children of all races and abilities playing together on the marble plaza, while judges and attorneys watched with smiles. "This is how I want it to really be," he explained, his finger tracing the colorful figures in his drawing. "A place where everyone belongs, and no one gets pushed down for being different." Michelle kissed her son's forehead, her heart full of love and pride. The child who had been victimized by hate had responded by imagining a world built on inclusion and acceptance. His vision of justice wasn't about punishment or revenge, but about creating spaces where everyone could thrive, regardless of their differences. Years later, when DeShawn had indeed become a federal judge like his mother, he would keep that childhood drawing framed in his chambers. It would remind him daily of the moment when he learned that justice isn't just about punishing wrongdoing, but about building a society where such wrongs become impossible. The courthouse steps where he'd been attacked would eventually be renovated to include a memorial garden dedicated to children who had shown courage in the face of adversity. DeShawn would speak at the dedication ceremony, no longer the frightened 8-year-old who had been pushed down marble stairs, but a confident young man whose commitment to justice had been forged in that moment of crisis. Karen Whitmore, upon her release from federal prison, would indeed devote her remaining years to working with disability rights organizations. Her transformation genuine, though born from the ashes of her former life. She would never fully atone for the harm she caused, but her later work would help prevent other children from experiencing what DeShawn had endured. The story that began with hatred and violence on courthouse steps had evolved into something much more powerful, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the possibility of redemption even in the darkest circumstances. DeShawn's courage had not only brought justice for himself, but had sparked a movement toward greater inclusion and understanding that would benefit countless other children. As Michelle watched her son sleep that night, his leg braces propped carefully beside his bed, and his latest drawing clutched in his small hands, she knew that they had won something far more valuable than a legal victory. They had proven that love, and justice could triumph over hatred and prejudice, and that even the smallest voice could echo with the power to change the world. The boy who had been pushed down for being different had risen to show everyone that our differences are not weaknesses to be hidden, but strengths to be celebrated. In a courthouse built on the promise of equal justice under law, DeShawn Johnson had lived that promise and made it real for generations to come.